Good afternoon. My name is Shire. I work for a company called Infineon. In case you don't know us, I work for the division which provides security ICs into all sorts of applications. And you've got some sitting in your pocket, although you probably don't know, which are in your, for example, in your banking cards or in your SIMs inside your mobile phone. So we're very heavily involved in endpoint security. I'm going to talk to you today about a couple of things. One is about firmware attacks, how they can be mitigated to a certain extent, but go through a couple of examples first. Then to look about how we think that in an industrial space, we can provide some countermeasures. I'll go through a couple of worked examples, but I'd like you to think about how this could be used in other applications as well. So, as mentioned, the famous IoT hack of the past couple of years is the Jeep Cherokee. What's worth identifying with this is it's not quite as simple as it looks in terms of the hack. Far from it. The ethical white hat hackers who actually did the work were on contract to the US DARPA to do automotive vulnerability analysis. When they bought the car and did some under the hood investigation, they found that effectively there are two buses. A control bus at the top, for doing all the main automotive systems of braking and so on, and an interior bus used for controlling of the lights and doors, etc. What they found, interestingly, is that Fiat Chrysler had decided to let these two communicate through the radio infotainment system, which seemed like a good idea at the time, so the driver knew what was going on with their car. Unfortunately, as it's been determined, the two researchers found that they'd left some of the ports open on the radio. Not just one, several. So it's worth checking everything twice. One of those ports was a server function for remote process control. And they found that it could be easily overcome with a command injection attack. Secondly, then they looked at the radio, and they found no authentication was required. So, just send a command and get it executed. In fact, the same port was open on the LTE. So in the US, if you had a Sprint cell phone and you needed commands, you could control any car from anywhere. A nice feature. But the two researchers were absolutely delighted when they found the radio was running Linux. And it was open to use. So the first thing they did was download their favorite tools and set up their own SSH. Now, their goal was to send messages to the CAN bus so they could control the car. Unfortunately, they didn't have all the code. But this is not a 5-minute job. And they luckily found that within a short time, an update was issued to the cars to allow firmware changes to the CAN bus through the radio. So they found out you had to authenticate this message. Otherwise, the firmware wouldn't take them. But fortunately, since they had control of the radio, they disabled the authentication check. Now they could push anything they liked to the CAN buses. The steering, the brakes, whatever you want. So it was basically the issue was making sure the firmware update process was secure, was the biggest issue they had. Firmware, whether you consider it as the BIOS or the operating system of any system, is the crucial factor. Get it right, and you might have the beginnings of a secure system. Next one, Ukraine. It wouldn't happen here. The Ukrainian power grid system was attacked by an attacker who decided that although the Ukrainian system was fairly well secured, there was a IT system and an operational system with a firewall in between. They spent months sending in Trojan software via email to people until somebody opened up that attachment that looked so attractive. Once they got through, they could then start conventional attacks on the IT system. They then got through the firewall. Again, they were able to establish malware on the operators. So they now had control of the operator's workstations. Very nice too. So now they decided to install some firmware on the circuit breakers. They had to develop their own custom firmware to do this, so that they could control it via the operational network and out through the IT network. Then came the time to instigate the attack. So they flipped off the breakers. Oops. But while they were doing that, they thought they'd do some useful upgrades at the same time. They reflashed the firmware on the serial to Ethernet converters to disable all remote access for anybody else. They also installed kill disk malware on the operator's workstation, so when they rebooted, they started erasing their own hard drives. And they reprogrammed the UPS so it would shut down every time somebody tried to reboot it. They then mounted a DDoS attack on the phone system to disrupt communications. Result, something like a couple 100,000 people were without power for a little while. The Ukrainians were not completely automated, so they basically picked up the phones to the guys in the street and in the field and told them to go around and manually reset the breakers. They've got a few spare resources, human resources. Now this is unique. Somebody spent a lot of time and effort. And of course, it wouldn't happen anywhere else. But it just shows you, IoT industrial solutions have IoT industrial size attacks. So let's talk a little bit about these attacks. IoT devices may not be the only real target. They may be using the IoT device as a way of getting through to the much bigger prize. It can be used for espionage, mass surveillance perhaps. But if we follow some guidelines, such as those given out today by the IoT Security Foundation, we might get somewhere. Look at firmware. How does it work? Somebody writes some code. Somebody transmits the code. The device itself has a way of installing the code. And then away you go. Simple, of course. The software development is, of course, in a secure laboratory. The download, of course, is going to be over a secure network. The install is going to be on a device which is always going to be on. Reality is slightly different. We do see attacks at the creation step, and that's often a case of simple principles of doing secure code development need to be put in place. We do see attacks through the distribution processes, of course, trying to substitute bad or old firmware during the distribution so to block updates. And we do see the situation when during the update, the devices may be somebody might try to interrupt the device so the update doesn't take place, also it has a corruption effect. But let's look at the operate step. This is where we want to look at today in my discussion. Here people are looking for vulnerabilities and how to exploit them, how to manage the firmware, how to inject malicious firmware. What can we do about it? There are a number of simple countermeasures. First, find the vulnerabilities and develop the exploits. Well, that's easy for any attacker. But what you've got to do in return is employ secure development processes. Make sure that people are trained. Restrict the access to that code so that it isn't just anybody can have a play and see what they can do with it. And use a measured boot technique to ensure the firmware is actually can deal with known vulnerabilities or triggers. Alternatively, when it comes to looking at the privileges to manage the software, be careful, restrict the upgrades, use a secure boot, and finally, when it comes to deflect malicious or obsolete firmware, again, use a combination of a secure boot and a measured boot. Now, if those terms aren't 100% clear to you, how the heck am I going to install such a product? Well, we have a solution, but there are many others. The solution the solution that we actually suggest is to use a trusted platform module. Why a secure, tamper-resistant, separate piece of silicon? That's expensive. Depends. This is industrial IoT. for the sake of a few dollars or less, it is possible you've now got a product you can rely on. It's developed to an open standard by the Trusted Computing Group and is used in hundreds, if not hundreds of millions of applications every day. It supports RSA, and the latest version supports elliptic curves. It comes with different interfaces, so if you're developing industrial products, your familiar interfaces such as I2C or the PC LPC bus or SPI can be used. Nice little packages and extended temperature ranges. So this thing will work for an industrial application. What will it do? It'll provide a source of authentication. It'll give you some secure storage for your keys and certificates. It'll provide a true random number generator, which is AIS 31 compliant, and do key creation on chip. And most importantly, it'll do various platform integrity checks. So what can you see it doing? At the first stage boot, it'll do a quick check. It'll produce a hash, and that can be verified. At the next stage boot, as we go up the steps, each time hashes are created and checked. So you can be certain that all the levels of your software stack have been verified and authenticated. Once you've got that, you can now talk about remote attestation. This is to prove to a third party that your operating system and application software are intact and trustworthy. The requester can inspect the registers in the TPM and so verify that chain is there. Each TPM ships with its own secure endorsement key, burnt in by the manufacturer, us or others. A public key is available then, so that then a certification authority can actually can generate certificates around it. This process is very, very well defined. There's a lot of open source code out there for people to work with. So a couple of reference designs. We did a little bit of work with a combination of Xilinx and Avnet. We looked trying to show an example of where we could see a real product requirement. So where you have a cloud-based service, a device which in itself has got sensors and actuators attached, and in this case it's got a TPM. This was realized by a micro Z board from Xilinx and some cloud services that we acquired and borrowed from various useful people like IBM. We now have a full stack that we can control and manage at different stages. It looks like one of these. So Avnet, as you probably know, is a very large distributor and now selling this product across the world. So you basically got a micro Z system on module solution, followed by an Arduino area and various plugins that you can put in. So you can put actuators and sensors in there and various other adaptations. And finally, a small TPM board. This is not a small, low-cost integrated solution. That's the Zinc itself. It's a nice little ARM9 platform with as many interfaces as you could possibly handle, plus its own trust zone, and can therefore support high-speed RSA and AES and Shire management. So what else do you need? Well, one of the things we've seen is that there is a need to go from a solution which I'm prototyping on a bench into production. And with this platform, since it is using off-the-shelf solutions, you can take a prototype design today and build a production unit tomorrow in hardware with very few changes required. There's a full bill of materials provided. From the software possession, again, the stacks are the same. So we know exactly what we're dealing with. It's a much faster time to market solution. And it's, again, if you're using proven technology with proven platform, you're de-risking some of the process at least. The way it works at the present moment is that the keys are generated by the board itself. These public keys are then available for use and can be verified. So we now have a selection of keys that the Zinc board has generated. And that's a relatively strong solution, but we went one stage further. We went to the stage now of using a TPM added on, and now at each stage a hash is generated. Now we have a solution where we have got hashes for each of the steps in the boot process, and we know what we're dealing with. And it can be inspected. So we're not just taking my word for it. Let's look at a second solution. Here we were talking about smart buildings. The issues here are around the problems, of course, that you've got distributed solutions, and attackers will look at trying to put in subsystems, or perhaps to interfere with cameras and such to facilitate theft. You've got to have some form of node security. We came up with a nice solution. Working with Cisco and Intel, we took a Cisco server and a Cisco router and a Raspberry Pi with a TPM on the side. We put TPMs in each stage. This was done in collaboration with a university in Rapperswil near Zurich, and its solution has been relatively straightforward when it can now be reduced down to a couple of slides. So at the beginning, the camera will ask for if it can start a session. The router says, "Who the heck are you?" It does a verification of the certificates inside the camera, and then it allows to open up an SSL session. So now I have a link between my camera and my router, which is trusted. Similarly, between the server and the router, again, wants to start a session, "Who the heck are you?" And again, the same process applies. We go through verification, it's authorized, and the process starts. So now we have a full open SSL session to the Raspberry Pi. This is using a technique of the Trusted Computing Network called Trusted Network Connect. It's a specification which supports endpoint compliance. You can block unauthorized users, for example. You can grant various levels of access to authorized users. And it's probably one of the most commonly used solutions within the trusted computing net business these days. It's an open architecture, so that you're not locking yourself into one supplier. So protecting your solution is complicated. But in an industrial space, adding a TPM might be a good step. You can do measured boot from it. You can do remote attestation of the whole system. And, of course, the possibility of strong authentication and a true random number generator. The chip itself is tamper resistant. Our products are EAL4 high certified and recommended by UK government. But the possibility then of using those processes to do further versions, including some of the NIST requirements, make it very handy. So it's a question of looking for the products that are out there and exist today, not having to invent new ones. If you want more information, please have a look at the website. The last piece of advertising. We do a few other things. We do embedded security solutions, everything from printer cartridges upwards. Yes, we get involved in M2M space, so for industrial IoT, a lot of industrial IoT solutions require an embedded SIM device. Quite a lot of those are ours. And for the users, how do I authenticate my user? have a look at FIDO if you haven't come across it. Again, an open standard. For more information, please visit another website. Thank you very much. Any questions?